So have you ever wondered what Jane Bennet looked like? We know she was the most beautiful girl in the room. She was an angel. But exactly what did the Regency era think that meant? What did they imagine Jane to look like? What were their beauty standards? Those are excellent questions that we're going to answer for you here today. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. If you like either of those things, please subscribe. So today we're going to be talking about Regency era beauty standards, especially those related to women and how we see those portrayed in Jane Austen's novels. Now, before we get into this, I do want to give a massive disclaimer that you are beautiful just the way you are. I don't want anyone watching this video comparing themselves to these standards thinking like, oh no, I don't measure up. No, you're beautiful just the way you are. All beauty standards of any culture in any time period are problematic, and so are the Regencies. But I do think it helps us really understand the world of Jane Austen more and her characters and how they would have seen the world. So that is why we're covering it here today. First up, let's talk about two major trends in beauty that are important in understanding the Regency era. The first one is naturalness. They were very much going for that natural, I just woke up like this, I'm not wearing a bunch of makeup, and I'm not wearing a big wig sort of attitude. This was a striking difference from earlier generations where they were powdering wigs and wearing very, very heavy rouge, right? They were like, no, we're the natural generation. Now, that being said, rouge was still in heavy use in the Regency era. It would continue to lessen and lessen as a socially acceptable cosmetic throughout the 19th century. By the end of the Victorian era, they were really demonizing the use of rouge. It was like, wow, you must just be so vain and slightly morally questionable because you're wearing rouge. But here in the Regency era, you could still wear it, though natural blushing was, of course, more ideal, which is something we will talk about in a little bit. But overall, they were definitely going for this I'm just healthy and vibrant and natural sort of look. Basically, there's no heavy contouring in the Regency era, guys. So another important trend to know is that of the classical. They loved the ancient Greek and Romans. They were all about them. Whether it was from architecture to education to the way they dressed. That's why you get that very specific silhouette in the Regency era where it's closer to the body, much like a classical Roman or Greek robe. Basically, the Greeks and Romans were trending and everyone wanted to be like them. And this included beauty standards. Basically, if you could look like a Greek or Roman statue, that was ideal. Right? They would look at statues of Aphrodite and Artemis and Athena and be like, wow, that's what a real woman looks like. That is true beauty. So, you look like a Greek statue, you are on the right track here. So in the most basic terms, more than likely, Jane Bennet looked like a Greek statue. But before we get into all the details of what Jane would have looked like, here's a word from this video sponsor. My bedroom is one of my favorite places. It's somewhere I like to curate so that it will feel luxurious and soft and welcoming and just a little introverted haven where I can read and sketch and express myself and rest and recharge. And that's why I've partnered with Brooklinen for over 2 years now. I currently have their Luxe sateen sheets on my bed, and they just add that luxurious, luminous touch to my life that makes me feel like the lady of a grand estate whenever I sleep in them. I just love slipping into them at night. One of my favorite things about shopping with Brooklinen is that you can mix and match colors on their website. I always love to see what their latest limited edition colors are so I can create the exact look I'm going for. This time I decided to pair two of my favorite shades of green, and on top of that I got one of their lightweight cotton quilts because I thought it added such a cute and classic touch. And good news, you can get 15% off your first order with Brooklinen, so definitely click the link in the description below and start upgrading your bedding with Brooklinen today. Thank you so much, sponsorship Ellie. So what would Jane Bennet have actually looked like? Well, one thing she would have a lot of is symmetry. Now, the Regency era believed that true beauty consists in due proportion and symmetry of parts. Basically, there were certain proportions you needed to have and all this symmetry in order to be beautiful, technically, in the Regency era. And this really led the Regency to have very strong opinions on the correctness of physical appearance. You either adhered to these rules or you were incorrect and did not adhere to these rules. And so some of the terms we see coming up in Jane Austen's novels really demonstrate this. So for example, in Emma, the main character, Emma is described as very handsome, and one of the things she has is regular features. Regular features is defined as their beauty consists in their regularity. It is a matter of symmetry, proportion, and harmony. It is something objective and external. It is reducible to rule. It is independent of the caprice or particular impression of our own mind. Basically, these regular features were deemed correct by the rules that the Regency had set up. And they like to think that these were super objective rules, right? These were based on science. This isn't just someone's opinion of what's pretty or not. This is real. Meanwhile, your body could also be correct or incorrect. For example, we see in Sense and Sensibility, it says, Miss Dashwood had a delicate complexion, regular features, and a remarkably pretty figure. Marianne was still handsomer. Her form, though not so correct as her sister's, and having the advantage of height, was more striking. So here we see that Miss Dashwood, Eleanor, basically has a correct figure, while Marianne has a more incorrect figure. But it is offset by her height. And if you watch my shorts, you know that Jane Austen kind of had a thing for height. She was tall herself, and she found height pretty, and so a lot of her pretty characters are described as being tall. So here we see the Regency era with all of these rules that they think are super objective and universally applicable. And you know who's great at applying these rules? Who really considers himself a connoisseur of beauty in these rules? Well, Mr. Darcy. So of course there's that famous scene where he looks at Lizzie and says that she is not handsome enough to tempt him. But why? Why is she not handsome enough? Well, she's not living up to these correct and regular features. For example, we later hear that he thinks that she had hardly a good feature in her face, so no regular features there. And he detected with a critical eye more than one failure of perfect symmetry in her form. She just does not have a correct form. But you know who does have a correct form? Jane Bennet. We see Mr. Darcy, while not giving her his complete stamp of approval, doesn't really have anything negative to say other than that she smiles too much, which means that she must be living up to these rules. Because again, he's such a connoisseur of these things. But now let's get down into the nitty-gritty details of what Jane would have actually looked like. One thing is, again, she would have looked very inspired by classical statues. She would have had either an oval or very rounded face with a rounded jawline. Meanwhile, her eyes would have sat perfectly on the center line of her face, again with the whole symmetry thing, and they would have been very doe-like. There's a good possibility that they would have been darker too, whether that's darker blue, darker hazel, or brown. There was a preference for darker eyes. So Jane's nose would have probably Roman with a very strong bridge. Now this is interesting later in Pride and Prejudice when Miss Bingley is talking about how Lizzie is not pretty at all. She says that her nose lacks character. She just doesn't have the strong aristocratic nose. Now, Jane's mouth would have been very small and rosebud-like. We have a whole scene in North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell talking about how the heroine of that novel had a very large mouth, and it was not rosebud-like at all. These beauty standards just never died in the 19th century. Also, when we come to small and delicate things, definitely hands and feet were supposed to be small and delicate, as were ankles. Do you guys remember my ankle flirting video? Sometimes I forget I made that video and I rerun across it and I'm like, I made a whole video on how to flirt with your ankles. True fans watch my ankle flirting video. Well, if you have seen that video, then you know that ankles were quite a hot commodity back in the day, and so Jane would have had delicate ones. Now let's talk about another major aspect of beauty in the era, which was youth and wealth. these were two very vital things everyone was going after looking like, right? They wanted to be young and wealthy. But how did that come across in your appearance? Well, there's a few different ways, and one that is talked about constantly in Jane Austen's novels is a lady's complexion. Now, the ideal complexion for a lady was a brilliant one. What does that mean? Because it sounds kind of shiny. Are you supposed to be shiny? No. Basically, a brilliant complexion was a combination of having incredibly fair white skin and having a lot of pinks and blues in your skin. Let's talk about this. So first of all, I just want to reiterate my disclaimer that I feel like God made us with diverse skin tones because he thinks they're beautiful and I think they're beautiful. However, that is not how the Regency era felt. To them, only the ultra fairest of skin was considered beautiful. And even then, those people with ultra fair skin had to protect it and whiten it at all costs. This is why we see such a usage of parasols and bonnets and staying indoors. They wanted it to be so white. Like, you know how after you've been inside all winter and your skin has never seen the sun? That is what they wanted to look like year round, all over, even their face. Even Jane Austen characters that we see described as brown, such as Mary Crawford or Marianne Dashwood, still had very light skin. It was just not as light as this ideal was. For example, we see when Lizzie goes on her traveling vacation with her aunt and uncle, and then suddenly she's described as brown and coarse because she's been out in the sun in a carriage. Again, there's no tanning allowed in the Regency. Now, something interesting to note about Marianne Dashwood is her skin is noted for its transparency, which is helpful for the second part of this brilliant complexion equation. First, you wanted very fair, very transparent skin, and the next thing you wanted was color, but reds, pinks, and blues. So why would anyone ever want blue in their skin? Well, it means your skin is light enough and transparent enough that people can see your veins. So for example, do you see how you can see the veins in my chest? It was considered beautiful in the 19th century to be able to see a woman's veins through her skin, and in fact, we have this one Victorian author describe it this way. Hence, the skin in woman less conceals the veins, of which the color, only enfeebled or modified by the skin, gives all those shades of azure, which the charmed eye follows with so much pleasure on the surface of the bosom, and of all the parts where the skin had least of thickness. So I guess Regency and Victorian men were just busy running around checking out the veins on a woman's bosom. Yeah. So that is for the blues. What about the pinks and the reds? Well, I mean, you may most commonly know that as blushing. Blushing, guys, was like a national obsession. They were obsessed with young ladies' ability to blush. One factor is it was considered a major mark of health and vitality. Younger women blush easier and more than older women, and so it was like, wow, you're young and healthy and beautiful if you can blush well. Now, blushing naturally has a different look than artificial rouge. For example, we see in this portrait of what was a famous Regency era beauty, the Honorable Mrs. Graham, a very natural blushing pattern that goes much further down on her cheeks than how most women apply rouge today. To see natural blushing, which can almost appear kind of splotchy and all over the place. However, that would have been the ideal for the Regency era, the real authentic blush of a young lady. Something else really important to note too is that blushing was seen as a moral marker. Basically, it was thought that young ladies were able to blush if they were innocent and they were humble and they were all of these great traits. If a young lady couldn't blush, basically it was like, oh, what have you seen? What have you done that you're not even capable of blushing anymore? And then, of course, as a lady got older, the lack of blushing was coincided with the end of her youth and her bloom of beauty. And in fact, we hear this word bloom quite a bit in Jane Austen's novels. Now, the majority of the time, it's actually just describing blushing or the lack of ability to blush or going to blush, being able to blush because you're a young lady. And then it is also a key central factor in a bigger picture term, such as losing her first bloom of youth or bloom of beauty. Now, yes, that's talking about a bigger, like her looks have gone downhill now that she's older. But a key central component of that is this loss of the ability to blush. In fact, some people thought that without blushing, there was no beauty. But say you are a young lady who is struggling to get your blush going. How do you make your cheeks bloom like a rose? Well, one of the key things you can do is go for a walk. Seriously. In fact, a journal in 1806 encouraged young ladies to take a regular morning perambulation whenever the weather will permit. This habit would make her fair and ruddy, give her skin the agreeable sleekness, and supersede the most admired and most expensive cosmetics that have been invented since fashion began to slight spontaneous graces, when put in competition with charms which are always vendible at perfumers. AKA, instead of wearing rouge, go for a walk. Don't be trying to artificially create these natural charms of blushing. Just exercise. You know who tried out this going for a walk method and found that it worked fabulously? Elizabeth Bennet. In fact, we see Mr. Darcy checking out her blush when she arrives at Netherfield. It says, the former was divided between admiration of the brilliance which exercise had given to her complexion, and doubt as to the occasions justifying her coming so far alone. He's like, wow, look at that blush she's got going on. It's so brilliant. But was the blush really worth it? Was it worth walking alone that far? I don't know. So again, Jane Bennet would have had a brilliant complexion, but what about Jane's body? What would that have looked like, other than, of course, having perfect symmetry? Well, one thing is she would not have been as thin as Lizzie was. Instead, she would have had lots of soft curves. Now, this would have been seen as two things. One, healthy, and also wealthy. First up, healthy. We learned that a woman never enjoys existence better than when a moderate plumpness bestows on her organs all the suppleness of which they are capable. Ah, Jane just over there with a moderate plumpness. Organs, always enjoying the suppleness. So as we see, this moderate plumpness was seen as a good sign of health and also a very important sign of wealth, because it was only the wealthy who were able to have this softness to them, right? Because it means they had enough food and enough leisure time in order not to be all muscly or thin, right? They're like, I have time to have this moderate plumpness. And in Emma, we see Harriet Smith, who's quite a beauty, described as short, plump, and fair. As for Jane's body type, she would have had a lot of curves, with large hips, large thighs, and a large bosom, apparently covered with blue veins. I'm never getting over the vein thing, guys. And that, my friends, is why Jane Bennet would be just such a beautiful and lovely and perfectly proportionate member of Regency Era society. But let us look at these factors when it comes to a Jane Austen heroine who has lost her beauty and then gained it back. You guys know who I'm talking about. It is Anne from Persuasion. We learn in Persuasion that Anne has very regular, very pretty features. And basically, she has the underlying groundwork of proportion and symmetry happening for her in the Regency era. But we see in the story people more or less acting like she's not pretty anymore. And the major factors contributing to that is that she is faded and thin. Basically, she has lost her bloom. So Anne goes through a transformative journey throughout the story physically, where she gets that bloom back. In the vital scene we see in Lyme, when her cousin first bumps into her and is like checking her out, this is how the book describes her. It says, she was looking remarkably well, having the bloom and freshness of youth restored by the fine wind which had been blowing on her complexion. So here, the wind is making her blush come back, right? So it's blowing some beauty back into her life. Meanwhile, when Anne gets back from Lyme and runs into Lady Russell lets her know that she's improved in plumpness, right? She's getting her plumpness back. And this gives Anne some hope. The book says Anne, in receiving her compliments on the occasion, had the amusement of connecting them with the silent admiration of her cousin, and of hoping that she was to be blessed with a second spring of youth and beauty. So, she's getting her blushing back, she's getting the plumpness back. But is it real? Well, you know who would let her know for sure if she was really getting her looks back or not? Her dad. Yeah, you know, Sir Walter and his obsession with beauty. So when she goes to Bath and runs into her dad, what does he have to say? It says that he thought her less thin in her person, in her cheeks. Her skin, her complexion greatly improved, clearer and fresher. Has she been using anything in particular? He's like, what is the secret? You have this second spring of youth and beauty? Tell me. So really, throughout the whole story, Anne Elliot has the symmetry and proportions and regular features that Regency society would have seen as beautiful. What she was lacking was the brilliant complexion, especially the aspect of the ability to blush, and the moderate plumpness, which is what she regains, and thereby regains a second spring of youth and beauty. So what did Jane Bennet look like? Well, she would have looked like a Greek statue with a vibrant blush and curvy hips. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think of these Regency era beauty standards? Have you lost your bloom? Are you going to work on getting your blush back like Anne Elliot? Or are you like, that was a weird beauty standard to begin with? Anyway, let me know in the comments down below. And definitely remember to check out this video's sponsor. Remember that you can get 15% off your first order with Brooke Linen, and definitely check out their limited edition colors. I'm really loving the greens. So click the link in the description below and start shopping Brooke Linen today. As always, guys, keep being awesome, because you're awesome. Bye!